Welcome to Blizzard and Bloom, the podcast where we navigate the storms and celebrate the triumphs in business and entrepreneurship. Join us as we dive into stories, insights, and strategies from top professionals to help you thrive in today's evolving landscape. And now, here is your host, Jay Rotinelli.
Hey, hello everybody. Welcome back to Blizzard and Bloom. Last episode, we had Darcy Creative's marketing team on with us, Julie and Darcy, and we shared some great insights on marketing for the landscape and snow industries. So that was a great episode. Hopefully you had a chance to listen to it. Today, we are fortunate to have on a guest, Megan Kirchner, who's an immigration attorney specializing in employment-based immigration. I've been fortunate enough to connect with you, Megan, on LinkedIn, and then we've kind of shared some mutual connections. And I think I want to let you speak, but this whole immigration thing is very important, and I thought it'd be great to have you on. So thanks for joining us today. And if you could kind of give us a little background of kind of who you are and you know what you have going.
Sure. I'm an immigration attorney by trade. I've been doing this for over 10 years. Really have done the whole spectrum of employment-based immigration, your alphabet soup, if you will, of immigrant visas. They all have some sort of acronym, from your tech visas, your self-sponsored visas. And right now I'm focusing on H-2 visas for agriculture H-2A and H-2B for non-agricultural temporary seasonal visas. So have a lot of clients in the landscape industry. So I'm certainly well-versed.
Great. So I was chatting with you earlier, and I think part of it through our industry association, some folks actually don't know what the H-2B program is, right? So when they see some of our companies out there, whether it's snow or landscape industry or service industries,
Right.
they're seeing foreign workers, and they're not sure how you go about going that route. And if you could just share a little bit about what the H-2B program is. And
Sure. It's like I said, it's a temporary work program. It's not permanent. It is seasonal. So, for landscaping, that means either you have a season that you only operate during a certain period of the year, up to 9 or 10 months, or you operate year round and you have a distinct peak. Like your business records will show you are busier during one part of the year. So it really fills a gap for a lot of people in the industry where maybe they can't grow or, they just can't meet customer demand because there's a labor gap. So it allows U.S. employers to fill that gap via temporary foreign employment.
Gotcha. I know for us at Piscataqua Landscaping, we rely heavily on the H-2B program. And I think this is our 16th year involved in the program. But during COVID, there was that year where we didn't get visas, and
Yes.
it was difficult. We had a lot of trucks and equipment that sat and we had to pay for throughout the year, and that was painful. And not only that, but we couldn't deliver the services to our clients like we were, right? So talk to us a little bit about what's the procedure and the process of how you even get into something like this?
Right. So being informed is the most important thing. There are people that self-file, there are people that use attorneys, there are people that use non-attorneys. The place to start is just to be informed about the program. It is a long process. The most important thing is to be prepared. And just for a frame of reference, it's, there's 2 start dates, essentially, the way the cap works at this point. And so you either have an October 1st start date or you have an April 1st start date. And I start April 1st filings in August, the preceding August. And for October 1st start dates, I start in April. If you want to get started in it, think about whether your business records, are you seasonal? Do you operate only during certain times of the year? Or are you peak load? Can you show from discernible business records that you're busier, say April through December? Maybe your revenue, maybe your contracts, payroll, overtime rates, something in your business records show that you meet that requirement, and can tie that to either a tourist season or a weather season or some sort of business related industry peak. And then you can once you meet these basic requirements, you can learn more about the steps that are involved in that 8-month process.
Yeah, it's a long process. That I do know. As I shared with you, I'm not overly involved with the H-2B
Mhm.
process here at Piscataqua. We have a team that handles that, but I do
Sure.
know that it's a lengthy process, and there's a certain degree of forecasting out that you need to do, right?
Right.
For that, and what does the business look like? What am I going to have for revenue?
Right.
So that's important too. And you bring up a good point. So when people, sometimes they'll see us on job sites and they'll say, well, how did you go about it? Or like, what are some of the challenges with it? Like, what are the pros and what are the cons, or what are the challenges working with this program?
Sure. The challenges can be many, and largely they're bureaucratic. The biggest obstacle isn't necessarily for my clients, particularly in landscaping or snow removal, isn't proving a season or a peak load. The hardest part is the cap. It is a capped program. There's only a certain number of visas available every year, and it's broken up into two parts. So that where I fall into that, the government fiscal year resets October 1st. That's the first half. Second half is April 1st. And so what a lot of employers run into is it's not as difficult for winter. So if you're ice or snow, the availability doesn't run out. It's not as competitive for October 1st, but April 1st, that's your primary filing season. And it's a lottery-based program. So the cap is a major obstacle, which is where that strategizing, talking to your attorney, trying to figure out what your options are. If this is for scenario A, scenario B, if you fall into group A, B, C, so on and so forth, kind of strategizing what your plan is to try and get workers if, the best case scenario isn't what happens. Timing, it can be an issue as well. So if you don't, maybe you're in Alaska and you can't start working April 1st, right? You can't have a start
Right.
date April 1st. That can be a problem. So, by demand, demand outpaces supply by so much, your start date they're artificially set at April 1st. So maybe you can't get into the program because your start date isn't April 1st. So that can be a challenge. For the lower states, it's generally not as big of an issue, but it can be. Regulatory hurdles are huge. They have wage requirements, fee requirements, things you can, experience requirements that you can't have too much experience required. You can't say the guy you want to bring has 12 months of experience, but for a laborer, it's not reasonable. It's going to get kicked back. Cost can be prohibitive depending on what size employer you are, because there's legal fees, government filing fees, like I said, travel fees for the workers. There's a lot of costs, but that being said, I have people that are very small that file for 2 workers and it's still worth it for them. The return on investment is still worth it. So
It's
it's really a
yeah,
situational.
and that's a great point, right? Because I've talked to others, and two things come to mind. Like, wow, I don't know if we can afford it, and I always
Right.
sit back and say, trust me, once you get into this program, you can't live without it. Is really what
Right.
ends up happening, right? And then the
Yeah.
flip side of it is, sometimes, and again, it's all about perception out there in the public, but in some people's minds, they're thinking, wow, you got cheap labor. That's not the
Right.
case, right?
No,
So
it is
can you
hard.
talk to us a little bit about that and
Yes.
reaffirm that?
That is particularly a good point this year because the wages are set by the government. You can, if you're curious, you can go to Department of Labor's website, pull the wages. You'll get the wages estimated by type of job you're doing and where you are. I had a lot of employers this year that their wage went up like a full dollar over what they paid last season. It was one of the largest wage increases I've seen. And so it's not cheap labor. That being said, labor costs across the country have gone up anyway. But, so for most of my employers, their US workers are probably already making more than the prevailing wage, or at least before this year. I had a few this year where this is where that cost comes in, and compliance. You have to pay your corresponding US workers the same wage. They can't make less than a foreign worker.
Yeah.
So if you've got a large workforce, that can be a big increase, and that can make or break whether you want to continue if your prevailing wage goes up too high. So it's not cheap, but the proof is in the pudding. People are still doing it. So, it's worth it, even though it costs more, and it's definitely not free labor.
Yeah, there's that misconception, and it's bothersome to me because I know, like a lot of the folks that have been coming to us for several
Mhm.
years,
Mhm.
that we've really integrated them into the community.
Right.
And they're fantastic folks, and they're really part of it's an extended family. I know, like when we do our holiday parties at the end of the year before they go back, like we make sure we do it before because we want
Right.
all of them there.
Yeah.
So that there's that misconception that that oh wow they got cheap labor they only have to pay $10 an hour or 20. That is such a misconception. And
Yes.
so I appreciate you sharing that and reinforcing it coming from someone like yourself,
Sure.
because it's not the case, right?
No, no,
So
my employers, that's definitely a sticky issue because they have the stigma and they're like, no, these guys, not only are they making more than they would at home, but they're making good money for here too.
sure, yeah, yeah, and valued. So
Right.
one of the things and I don't know a lot about this, but it was one of the things I wanted to ask you about was
Mhm.
there was a returning worker exemption,
Right.
that was relative to the cap. Can you talk about that a little bit, what that was or what that is?
Yeah, there's been several iterations of that. The version that was a little more beneficial, was around from 2012 to 2016. That meant that the worker basically, if they'd been on H-2B in a certain number of years before, they didn't count against that cap I talked about earlier. That's a severe
Gotcha.
limitation. And that was really beneficial. It wasn't tied to a particular employer. You just recruited certain workers and, there wasn't a separate filing or eligibility requirement that the employer had to really undergo. The current version, which we'll see if it's status quo the next year, because it's a new administration, but basically after the cap gets hit during the first and second half, there is a supplemental visa release through the federal rulemaking process. They've issued it every year for the past, since 2019, it's been in a similar setup as it is right now. So essentially, any worker that's held an H-2B visa at least once in the past three government fiscal years can qualify for this additional pot of visas. They're not cap exempt. They still count against that separate pot. So it's a little different than what we had, a few years ago. But it's better than nothing. It does have some pressure release on the cap. So without getting into the nitty gritty, with the regular cap for the spring, I have 20% or 25% of my employers get in underneath that cap with no restrictions, right? Returning workers, there's another maybe 20 or 30%. So it provides additional visas, but still doesn't meet demand. There are pushes in large H-2B lobbying groups to change that version. So to have a different type of cap exemption that's employer specific. That has, there's been different iterations coming through trying to go through Congress for years, but there is constant work to try and improve it and kind of take away that risk of not getting workers year to year.
Yeah, yeah. And we're kind of talking about that cap, and how that relates to folks that have been coming. That cap, from my understanding, that hasn't really changed much from a right. And so, can you talk a little bit about that? Because my understanding is that cap hasn't changed yet.
No.
Businesses are growing, population's growing, the needs are ever growing. So
right, that cap hasn't changed since the 90s, and obviously economics, the labor landscape, everything has changed in that amount of time. But this is static, which is why there's been different attempts in Congress to temporarily take some pressure off of that cap, but hasn't been enough traction or consensus because it's such a sticky issue, immigration in general, to make any substantive permanent changes to it. And so most years, if you file an April 1st start date, there are only 33,000 visas, but there may be applications for 140,000 visas,
yeah.
And there's only, for that returning worker, cap that we just talked about, the supplemental visas, there's only 19,000 for the spring and, 20,000 for the fall. And it's still, those get hit every year and don't make it through all of the employers that would have wanted to have workers in the program.
Yeah. It's something that it's not 100% in.
No.
Like to your point, it's a lottery, right? And there's processes and systems that you need to follow. So if somebody was looking to get into this, like I had somebody ask me a couple months ago, like, oh, so what website do I go to just to look and start filing the paperwork? And I was like, time out. Like it's a lot more involved than that, right?
Yeah.
Don't try to wave the ocean by yourself. So what is the right process for somebody looking to get started down this road of the H-2B program?
Yeah, talk to somebody. There's a lot of attorneys will have either literature or some will have, like myself, for instance, I do free consultations just because the number of people I talk to that either can't meet the program or can't afford it, it's not worth I'd rather have good faith than talk to someone to keep trying to learn about the program. I try to get as much literature out there as I can. I keep a Reddit thread about H-2B to people like, hey, are you interested? This is what it's about. Maybe it's right for you. Maybe it's not. You want to talk more, contact me. Right. So, just be aware there's multiple government agencies involved. There's Department of Labor, there's USCIS, there's Department of State for the consulate, for the visa process. There's a lot of steps. And if you miss a deadline, you can't recover. The number of people that reach out to me that say, hey, I did it myself, or hey, I used an agent, or I used an attorney that has never filed one of these before. And I'm like, well, it's a fatal flaw. I can't fix it. I can help you next year, but I can't fix it right now. So cost, obviously cost is a consideration. Not everybody can afford an attorney, but if you can, it's could make the difference between getting workers this year or not, especially if you get into the gray area of all the supplementals and all of the cap exemptions. And, so trying to plan alternatives if you don't make the cap, or be prepared to know maybe you won't make the cap. So you need to be ready for a backup option. You won't necessarily know all of that just by looking at how to do the process.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I know just from, we set a budget every year of what our goals from a sales standpoint are going to be, but
sure.
We need to also be prepared to make adjustments because, and I'm not saying it drives our entire business, but it drives a great portion of the business.
Yeah.
But that's the only way we've really been able to grow. And there's other ways, sure, mergers, acquisitions, all of that, but to continue to deliver service in the same market that you're in, you're always dealing with the same labor pool, right? Yes. So if there's only X amount of labor, you're not going to grow exponentially if there's no more to pull from. So
no. And the number of times I just have that conversation with people that have done it 1 year and they come back the next year and like, we have to do it again. Like, we can go 20% this year because now we can take on new contracts. Like, we know we're going to have 10 additional guys. So like, we can plan how many contracts we can take, or we can bid on this, municipal contract that's going to be a 3-year contract. It doesn't necessarily make or break everyone and whether they can operate, but it definitely can severely help, impact growth positively or negatively, depending on how your season goes. And, I've even had conversations with employers where I'm trying to hire. I can't find anybody. I'm not getting my guys this year. I might just retire or sell my business because I can't operate this year. I've been trying to hire U.S. workers to backfill because I knew I'm not getting my H-2B workers, and I don't know what I'm going to do.
That's interesting because, and I'm sure you've seen it in publications, but the whole M&A market of that's what's happening, right? You have these sole proprietors or, small business owners, and they're just at a point they're at wit's end, and they have never had the opportunity to use the H-2B program or even kind of just really thinking outside the box a little bit. And it's great when you can absorb a company, but most often when we look at it, we do it because we're looking at the labor force too and what they have for team, right? So it's great to bring in all this business, but if you don't have the labor force to go with it, then that's a problem as well. So it's an interesting road to weave. And I think the longer you're in it, the more, and you're working with somebody like yourself, you start to find little ways to work through things, right?
Right. And that's a good point. And one way people can kind of mitigate their risk if they're flexible, and not everyone can do this because, like you said, your guys are family, and that I run across a lot. So if someone's been in the program, they're a little less flexible, so they're only looking at the same guys. So they want returning workers, and that's it. And obviously, there's a limitation to that for newer people to the program. As it stands today, and we'll see if this continues in the future, but it's been like this even under this administration in its first, version. This was still a thing. There's a separate cap for Central American workers. Like they don't have to have had an H-2B before, and that cap again, based on prior years, has never been met. So if you're new to the program and don't need a particular country and you're open to new workers, I like to tell people, it's not a matter of if you're going to get workers, even in the spring, it's when, because if you're in group F, you'll be a little later. They may not start April 1st, but they're going to come. There's going to be visa space left for that. So, it's not all doom and gloom in its current state, but it just depends on how flexible you are and what your needs are.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, do you see, now you've been in it quite an extensive period of time. Do you see any like trends changing with it or policy changes with the program that you're seeing, or do you think might be headed in a direction?
It's really too early to tell whether this is going to be a program that's really impacted by the administration or not. It wasn't as impacted last time negatively, like, your asylum or something like that, or H-1B. Things did work a little slower. There were fewer supplemental visas. There was consular appointments were required, and they're kind of bringing that back, which that slows down when your guys are going to get here. Because now that rather than just having to submit their passport, they have to wait for an
appointment,
in-person appointment. Exactly. They have to show up and see an officer face to face. That does slow things down. So that, that will make things slower, not impossible. I would expect an uptick in administrative processing, which means if your worker, is going through the consulate, going through the interview, if there's something in their background that has been illegal entry or something that they're flagged, they're going to be more likely to be put in secondary processing to where they don't necessarily get their visa the same day. I've had workers that have been here 10 years, and suddenly 1 year they get admin processing or denied or something like that. Just something has popped up in the system that they didn't see before. That may increase. It's, again, a little early to tell, but that could happen. So,
it's interesting. It's all these little pieces and components of it. And when I think about a company or individual trying to maneuver through that process themselves, kind of to your point, like it's a failure right off the get-go. And I hate to be that way, but that's the reality of it, right? When you don't know the program, we're pretty well versed in it only from, being involved in it so long. But there's still a lot to it. And the fact of the matter that, these folks, they're integrated into the communities. They're paying taxes. They're spending their dollars here. So everybody thinks they send every single dollar home. It's not the case. No. And it's been a great fit for us. They've been great in the community. Now we have folks that have worked for us for 10, 15, 20 years, and they've come together, and now they're connected on Facebook, and they're visiting down there or wherever they are across overseas. So that's pretty cool to see that happening. But, again, when we talk about long-term within the green industry, I without something changing within our country, like there's no relief outside of utilizing this program. And there's the right way to do it and the wrong way to do it. And, this is certainly the right way to do it. So
you do make a good point with, the future and nothing getting better. In fact, if this administration is as strict with undocumented as they say they're going to be, there's a lot of people in the industry and construction and a lot of other agriculture that do utilize undocumented workers. And if those workers are now too risky to employ, or they're hiding, or they've been deported, the only other option is H-2. And if we don't have any more numbers, demand's going to be even higher, and everyone's going to need it even more. So there's something going to happen.
And to your point, if they were here illegally and you were doing it that way, good luck trying to get into the H-2B program, right? Because you would be flagged, and you were not going to be one of the first ones to get some help. If anything, you were going to probably be banned from it. So
that's an excellent point. That is something new with the H-2 modernization that came out as of January this year. As part of those questions, there's now questions on the form that says, have you had wage and hour violations? Have you had any Department of Labor, USCIS, health code violations? Have you had any violations as a business? And they have the right to now, deny you or debar you because you have had violations. So it's even more important to make sure you're staying in compliance and handling things the right way, or maybe you'll be shut out altogether.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, yeah, it's tough. I know people, do what they can to stay in business, but
Right.
you really got to do it the right way,
Right.
So if there was it's kind of a closing note here, if there was some advice you'd want to give to some business owners,
Mhm.
kind of preparing for some of these challenges or facing these challenges, like what's
Sure.
some advice you could give to them on, what their next steps might be and how they could
Right.
benefit from this?
You know, if you're struggling to hire U.S. workers, you're hiring as many as you have available, and you still can't meet your customer demand. Your reputation's on the line. You need to meet your client obligations. It's worth exploring. It's not a perfect program, but it is what we have to work with, and it can drastically improve your revenue or your reliability. Even if you have the same revenue, it just means that you're not retraining every 2 weeks because
Yeah.
the guy that started 2 weeks ago is gone.
That's
So
frustrating in itself, right? And
it,
costly. It's expensive.
and costly, right? So if you're interested in learning more about the program, shoot your shot, reach out, see if you qualify, see if the cost makes sense to you. And, if it does, great. There's lots of people that can help. Make sure if you go to an immigration attorney, make sure they've done H-2B in the past. That doesn't mean that immigration attorneys that don't do H-2B can't, but just like your doctors, you have specialists, not all procedures are the same. Not all processes are the same. So
Good point.
make sure you
Yeah.
know who you're working with, whether that's an attorney, an agent. If you're doing it yourself, for goodness sake, do as much research as you can, because otherwise, when I get you the second year because something went wrong the first year, sometimes I can fix it and sometimes I can't, because I've had that happen before. Someone had an application, it was denied. They say, okay, I want to try again. I get a notice of deficiency from the Department of Labor and says, well, this is totally different than your last application. And I say, okay, here we go. We're going to re-argue the whole thing. And, I can be successful, and I get it through. But that being said, if that happens, we might miss the cap because of it, because now we've delayed the process by having to ask questions that I shouldn't have to answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Good point. So moving forward, if somebody is looking for, folks in next October, really April is the time,
Right.
correct? And then after that for the spring, when do you think they need to start working on the process?
April is not a drop dead date for October. That is when I usually send out my contracts in March and start the process in April. Just depends on how long Department of Labor is going to take. I can do them as late as May sometimes and still get in under the cap for October. If you're looking at next spring, April 2026, I send out contracts in July and start working on them sometimes same month, July, August. That being said, I have taken clients as late as October and still been successful, but then, I can't guarantee it when it's that late or that close to filing, because anything could happen. I could file a perfect application and Department of Labor has asked in the question, sent something asking for something trivial that's already there, or something that shouldn't be asked for, and I have to correct it. And I don't have time to refile an application if it's too short a timeline, right? So
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah.
we
Makes
just
sense.
want some breathing room in there.
Yeah. No, that's great. Listen, I appreciate your time today. Super informative.
Sure.
Folks, this is going to be very, very beneficial for folks, not only in the green industry and the snow industry, but in the service industry as well. So, if somebody wanted to reach out to find you, how would they find you, either online or
Yeah, they
any
can
other
track
way?
me down LinkedIn. It's Kirchner Law PLLC. I'm in Virginia, so if you find Kirchner Law Immigration, find me. I'm right outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. So either my website, LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So you can find me a lot of places. If you look for Megan Kirchner, you'll find me.
Great. And this is, you can help folks all across the United States, correct?
Yes,
This isn't just
immigration is
in
a
your
federal
area.
practice. Right. I've
Gotcha.
got clients all around the country. Mm-hmm.
Great. Awesome. Well, thanks for your time. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. And
Me.
I'm sure you'll have some folks following up with you. So
Yeah, that'd be great. And I'm happy to help.
thanks again. Great.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody for listening. Next episode, we have Dave Gallagher from the SIMA Foundation. He'll be joining us. So thanks everyone for your time.
Thanks for tuning in to Blizzard and Bloom with Jay Rotinelli. We hope you feel inspired and empowered. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Join us next week for more insights and stories to help you bloom in your business journey.